Recently, a misunderstanding caused a lot of tension in our home. My husband, Walter, accused me of ignoring a phone call from his mother. However, I was completely unaware of any such call. I never received it, but Walter was convinced otherwise. This wasn't the first time I had felt sidelined in my relationship with my husband and his mother. Ever since I married Walter, I had noticed that his mother favored him immensely, which often left me feeling like an outsider. Walter insisted that I should apologize to his mother for not answering the call. Not only that, but he also suggested that I should go to her home, quite a distance away, to apologize in person. Before I could even process this, Walter smirked and revealed that his mother would actually be moving in with us soon and would be staying indefinitely. The news was a complete shock to me. I was so startled that I accidentally dropped and broke one of my favorite glasses. The thought of having to rearrange our home to accommodate her, particularly having to give up my study, my private space, was deeply upsetting. Walter, however, did not seem to care about my feelings. He firmly told me that everything needed to be ready for her arrival, without any discussion or consideration for my thoughts on the matter. His dismissiveness only added to my frustration. Since the passing of his father, Walter had become even more attached to his mother, and it felt as though he was prioritizing her over our marriage. When I expressed my discontent, he simply brushed me off, stating that I had no say in the matter because the house belonged to him. That statement stung. I felt like my presence in my own home was being erased. Out of sheer anger and defiance, I impulsively called a demolition company, planning to tear the house down as a shocking response to Walter's insensitivity. Thinking back to how we met, it was all so different then. Our relationship had started in a whirlwind of romance. I met Walter at a corporate event where I was working as part of the event planning team. While he was an attendee, I still remember how confidently he approached me, requesting my contact information. There was something about his charm that intrigued me, and from that moment on, we formed a strong connection. Walter had a youthful energy that made me feel comfortable around him. Despite me being 2 years older, just 8 months into our relationship, we decided to get married. But as time passed, I began to see a different side of him, one I had not noticed before. One day, Walter told me that his mother wanted to meet me. It caught me by surprise because he had never mentioned introducing me to his family before. I found his mother to be somewhat difficult, which was clear from the first time we met. When we arrived at Walter's family home, his mother scrutinized me in a way that made me feel extremely uncomfortable. She barely acknowledged me and instead focused all her attention on Walter. During our marriage introduction, Walter was noticeably quiet, especially around his father. I soon learned that his father was a dominant figure in the family, and Walter had always relied heavily on his mother for support. I wanted to understand Walter better, so I engaged in conversations with his father, which did not sit well with his mother. She seemed displeased by my attempts to get to know her husband. Despite the initial tension, my father-in-law approved of our marriage, which was a huge relief. That night, we stayed at Walter's family home, and I had the opportunity to bond further with my father-in-law over drinks. He opened up to me about Walter's lack of confidence and how he had always tried to encourage him to be more independent. He also expressed his hopes that I would take good care of Walter. That conversation gave me a new perspective on my husband, and I started to understand him better. However, things took an unsettling turn when I realized Walter had suddenly disappeared that night. Strangely, his mother was also nowhere to be found. I had no idea where they had gone, but it made me uneasy. My father-in-law eventually fell asleep, leaving me to deal with the cold, judgmental gaze of my mother-in-law. She made it clear that from now on, I was to follow her guidance and ensure that Walter was well taken care of. The next morning, it was evident that she expected me to take on more responsibilities within the family. It was at that moment that I directly asked Walter if he was, in fact, a mama's boy. My question seemed to unsettle him. He dismissed my concerns, saying I was overthinking his father's words, but something still felt off. A few weeks later, Walter and I were unexpectedly invited back to his family home. Since our marriage, his mother had never invited us over, so I immediately suspected that something was going on. When we arrived, Walter was greeted with warmth by his mother, a warmth that was notably absent when she looked at me. I was also surprised to find that Walter's father was not there. When I asked about him, I was told he was likely at the hospital. Strangely, his absence didn't seem to bother my mother-in-law at all. Things became even more concerning when Walter and his mother decided to go out, leaving me behind to watch the house. It was explained as a favor to my father-in-law, who would feel uneasy if the house were left unattended. I reluctantly stayed behind, feeling completely disregarded. Later that night, my father-in-law finally returned home, surprised to see me alone. He had not been informed of Walter and his mother's visit, nor of their sudden departure. As we talked, he speculated that my mother-in-law had planned their visit while he was away on purpose. His words made me realize just how deep the family's dysfunction ran. He suggested we exchange contact information to stay in touch in case of future incidents. I agreed, feeling a growing sense of unease about the entire situation. That night, Walter called me and casually informed me that he and his mother had decided to stay elsewhere. He implied that I shouldn't bother coming back home. I was stunned, hurt and angry. I ignored his words and made my way back to our main house. When I arrived, I was greeted by the sound of Walter and his mother laughing together as if nothing had happened. Furious, I confronted them. "What are you doing here, acting like everything is fine while your father is left alone?" I demanded. Their response was dismissive. Walter even had the audacity to suggest that if I was unhappy, I could leave. That was the moment I realized how little I truly meant to him. This house was built by my late father using the last of his savings. It was more than just a house to me, it was a piece of my father's legacy. I retreated to my study, seeking solace in my passion for jewelry making. Hours passed unnoticed until dawn arrived. The next morning, my mother-in-law coldly hinted that it was time for me to leave. Once she was gone, the house felt peaceful again, a stark contrast to the tension she brought with her. Later that day, Walter informed me that his father's health had taken a turn for the worse. Despite everything, I reached out to my father-in-law. He confided in me about his declining health and made an unexpected request, one that involved teaching Walter and his mother a lesson for their neglect. Moved by his words, I committed myself to his cause, even quitting my job to dedicate my time to him. Together, we planned a course of action that would leave Walter and his mother with a lasting reminder of their actions. I stood beside my father-in-law, fulfilling his wishes and preparing for the consequences that would inevitably follow. It was not an easy path, requiring patience, strength, and many sacrifices, but I remained firm in my commitment. He trusted me in his final days, confiding in me and relying on my presence. I felt a deep sense of duty toward him, and despite the challenges, I stood by him without hesitation. One afternoon, my mother-in-law made an unannounced visit, claiming she had been in the area and decided to stop by. Her presence was unexpected and disrupted our day, but I remained polite. She seemed pleased when she heard that I was cooking and expressed excitement about the meal. However, when she tasted the food, her reaction was anything but appreciative. She dramatically spit it out, declaring that it was terrible. I was shocked because, to me, the food tasted completely normal, but under her harsh scrutiny, my husband, Walter, quickly took her side. He joined in on the criticism, saying that my caregiving responsibilities had distracted me from properly preparing meals. Hearing Walter agree with his mother so easily hurt me deeply. I had hoped he would stand by me, but instead, he was more concerned about pleasing her. Their decision to leave and eat at a restaurant, abandoning me at home, was another painful reminder that Walter would always prioritize his mother's opinions over mine. That night, when Walter returned alone, I confronted him about how quickly he had changed his opinion just to align with his mother. I had no expectations left for his support, and I told him bluntly that if he found my cooking so terrible, he could handle his own meals from then on. That conversation marked a shift in our relationship, reinforcing my focus on caring for my father-in-law rather than trying to please Walter and his mother. Over the next few months, my father-in-law's health took a sharp decline. One evening, during a critical emergency, we had to rush him to the hospital. On the way there, he spoke to me about his will, trying to share important information before his condition worsened. Sadly, before he could finish, his health deteriorated rapidly. He passed away at the hospital, leaving me in a state of shock and grief. When I attempted to inform my mother-in-law of his passing, her response was disturbingly indifferent. She showed no real concern or sorrow, making it painfully clear how little she truly cared for him. Even more appalling was the fact that neither she nor Walter bothered to visit the hospital in his final moments. Their absence during such a heartbreaking time revealed the truth about their characters, making me feel more emotionally detached from them than ever before. The funeral that followed was minimal and cold, arranged by my mother-in-law with the sole intent of saving money rather than honoring her late husband. The lack of effort put into the ceremony was yet another sign of how little she valued him. Witnessing this, I began seriously reconsidering my place in this family. The thought of divorce crossed my mind more than once. I had given so much, yet I was surrounded by people who only took from me without a shred of gratitude. In the days after the funeral, I found myself overwhelmed with grief. Each passing moment felt heavier than the last. It was during this difficult time that I received an unexpected phone call from a lawyer. The mention of my father-in-law's will reminded me of our last conversation in the ambulance. Curious about what he had wanted to tell me, I agreed to meet with the lawyer for the reading of the will. What I discovered at the lawyer's office was shocking. The will contained details that I had not anticipated, details that gave me leverage over Walter and his mother. When I returned home that evening, Walter was already in a sour mood. He accused me of ignoring calls from his mother, though I had not received any. It was yet another example of him blindly taking his mother's side without considering my perspective. To make matters worse, he announced that his mother would be visiting soon and suggested that she use my personal space for her stay. The complete disregard for my feelings was infuriating. However, with the newfound knowledge of my father-in-law's will, I knew I had the upper hand. Instead of arguing with Walter, I chose to take action. I contacted a demolition company, misleading Walter into thinking I was arranging for the sale of some household items. While he was occupied picking up his mother, I set things in motion. I packed my belongings and removed any items from the house that could be sold or donated. With everything in order, I met with a real estate agent and secured a temporary place to stay. Since finalizing the inheritance would take time, I needed somewhere safe and independent to live. That same day, I signed the rental contract, ensuring that I had a new home to move into the very next day. That night, I spent my final evening in the house that once belonged to my father-in-law. It was a bittersweet farewell, as the place held both cherished memories and painful experiences. Despite the emotions attached to it, I was ready to move on. I had made up my mind to build a new life for myself, free from the shadows of my past. After settling into my new home, I oversaw the demolition of the old house. This was a significant moment, fulfilling both my own sense of justice and my late father-in-law's final wish. Not long after the demolition began, I received a frantic call from Walter and his mother. They were in complete disbelief, demanding explanations. When I met them at the site, Walter was furious, unable to comprehend why his childhood home was being destroyed. I explained that it was both an act of revenge and a fulfillment of his father's last request. My mother-in-law's reaction was even more dramatic. In her rage, she attempted to physically attack me, but her efforts were fruitless. At that moment, I revealed the will, showing them the undeniable truth. The house and any remaining assets legally belonged to me. The bulk of my father-in-law's wealth had been donated to charity, leaving only a small sum behind. Walter and his mother were shocked to learn that their share amounted to just $6,000 each. Their dreams of inheritance were shattered. Defeated and humiliated, they had no choice but to accept their fate. My mother-in-law, still unable to control her anger, attempted another confrontation, but I simply walked away. I had no more words for them. Returning to my new sanctuary, I wasted no time in preparing divorce papers. Within 2 weeks, the divorce was finalized, cutting all ties between me and my toxic past. My final act of closure was removing any remaining belongings of my mother-in-law from my property. When they tried to resist, threats of legal action finally drove them away for good. Rumors later reached me that Walter and his mother had moved into a small apartment, constantly arguing and struggling with their new reality. Meanwhile, I had chosen to rent out the property instead of living there, honoring my father-in-law's memory while moving forward with my life. This was not just about leaving behind a marriage, it was about reclaiming my independence and embracing a future where I was no longer undervalued. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write on my own terms, free from the burdens of the past.